Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. My guests today have been on the show before, but not together. They are husband and wife. They are both wonderful medical doctors, plant-based medical doctors, and they're going to be talking about the gut brain immune connection. Please welcome back to the show, Dr. Melissa Mondala and Dr. Michael Yu. Nice to see you guys together. You were such a good looking couple, I got to tell you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Happy Saturday. It's lovely being here again.
I cannot wait. And you're both interested in the same things. That must be really rewarding because, you're married and you're on the same page basically as medical doctors.
Yeah, we want to tell them about
it's funny because we are in different specialties and not many doctors can come together on nutrition and diet, and it kind of made it easy when I introduced him to the plant-based diet, and it transformed our lives, and now that's all we do day and night literally, because we can't practice medicine any differently because of the plant-based message.
I know that's great because it would be tough if you guys had to. So you're the one that brought him to the team.
Yes. After I think about a year, I finally came around, and now we're both plant-based doctors. So it's nice, and we run a clinic together in Southern California, in Newport Beach, where we get to use plant-based nutrition to help our patients.
Yeah, so he had his own autoimmune disease, you probably heard in the previous show, and I had my own, I would say, irritable bowel syndrome. And so we were on this discovery to find what works because we didn't want to find ourselves adding more and more medications. And it was becoming to the point where we wanted to find something that could heal us completely. And that was amazing when we found plant-based nutrition. And so we fell in love with the science and we love working together.
I love that. So you see patients in your clinic, which is in Southern California. Do you also see patients virtually?
Yes, we do. So I am licensed in 15 states, and I see patients internationally as well. So I focus on autoimmune diseases and specifically more rheumatology and using nutrition and integrative medicine to help my patients. And Melissa focuses on primary care and mental health as well. So
nice. Well, your specialties kind of collide at some point, I think.
Yes. So that's why we have the gut brain immune talk today. That's where we intersect with our patients.
I love it. Well, I can't wait to hear it. It sounds fast. I love the bi-directional highway.
Exactly. It's all connected and they all talk to each other. And the more we connect, we can actually start to see the healing processes because we can't ignore one out without the other. And so we found that when we put two brains together, when it comes to health and healing, we can actually have a stronger message so that it's clear that really it works. When we heal our gut, we can heal our brain and our autoimmune diseases as well.
Did you guys meet before becoming medical doctors?
We actually met in undergrad,
in
college, for briefly as acquaintances, and we met again in Chicago, many miles away, about 6 years later. And that's when we started dating in medical school.
And our hometown really we're 5 minutes away from each other's parents. So it's just one of those where it was aligning, the stars aligned.
That's fantastic. Well, I can't wait to hear your presentation because this is a topic that our viewers and myself are very interested in.
Yeah, excellent. We're excited to share. So we're going to start our slides here. And please let me know if you can see it. Let's see here. I think we should. Green.
There we go.
Awesome.
And then we're going to hit slideshow.
Perfect.
Chef AJ, do you see the slides now?
It says gut brain immune connection and your names.
Excellent. Okay, so we're gonna get started here. So the title of our talk is Gut Brain Immune Connection. So I'm Dr. Micah Yu, and this is Dr. Melissa Mondala. And a little bit about us, Melissa, you want to talk about yourself?
So basically, I went into family medicine and lifestyle medicine. I'm double boarded in both. I completed my training at Loma Linda University, where I was able to go into a fellowship, which was really unique because I was able to see the specialty care and the hospital care and the rehab. So from beginning to end, I've seen disease reversal in many settings in intensive lifestyle change programs through fasting and plant-based nutrition. And And then I completed University of California Irvine Psychiatry Fellowship, and that's for primary care doctors. And then I'm also working with my husband at the Doctor Lifestyle Clinic.
And I am triple board certified in rheumatology, internal medicine, and lifestyle medicine. I'm currently finishing up my fellowship at the University of Arizona's Integrative Medicine. Fellowship, one of the classic places, is a 2-year program that focuses on supplements, herbs, mind-body medicine, learning a little about Ayurveda and other various alternative medicine techniques. And I'm also finishing up my functional medicine training this year as well. And our clinic is called Dr. Lifestyle, where we focus on lifestyle medicine. And it's located in Newport Beach, California. So we can tell you more about the clinic at the end of this talk. And Melissa will start off the presentation.
Sure. So thank you everyone for joining us. I know we've been through this long COVID pandemic. Some people want to call it an endemic, but we do know that even there's small pockets of COVID still. Throughout this week, I've been treating patients, and not only because of COVID rates, but also because what surrounds their disease, meaning a lot of people suffer from obesity, overweight, and that is really this big source of inflammation, and that allows patients to maybe have longer term symptoms and also complications from COVID. So from the statistics we can see here, unfortunately, we have climbing rates of people overweight. 42.4% are specifically obese, and 9.2% are severely obese. So BMIs are raging high, unfortunately, in both not just adults and children. And then we see it greater in males too as well. Unfortunately, we've seen the statistics here that when we look at the deaths from COVID, you see that there's a big relationship between weight and complications from COVID. So here you can see the higher in BMI, the greater risk for death from COVID. So there's definitely a relationship between why we get disease, why we get such diseases like COVID, and why there is this underlying inflammation. And altogether, we're going to show and demonstrate why that happens. First of all, I just want to take a step back and talk about diabetes, because when we think about obesity in the primary care world, it's not just someone with obesity. A lot of people come in my clinic with diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol. It's a almost trifecta. And when I think about mental health with depression and anxiety, it's almost a pentad, meaning there's 5 medical conditions already on people's problem list, and they are likely on 5 to 10 medications very quickly in just one visit, because they are inflamed. Their whole body has consumed this inflammation, likely because of their lifestyle factors and their health, their choices they made. So I just want to show this demonstration of this slide, saying that having better blood sugar levels decreases our risk from other deadly diseases such as COVID. You can see from this demonstration in this slide that people who have poor control over diabetes had 11% likely to suffer from COVID and specifically die from COVID. And if they had better control, they're less likely to have COVID mortality. So looking at the root causes of not only death, but also complications from COVID, we see that poor control of diabetes is definitely a risk factor. And we want to see that in COVID, it's not just the obesity, not just the diabetes, the heart disease, which is very common with people who have complications from COVID. But then during this whole pandemic, we can see that there's been a time where all ages, unfortunately, has suffered from COVID. We know that from young to old. You can see on the left side, bigger proportions starting in the 40s to 70s to even 80s. But what does the depression look like? We see that the symptoms of anxiety and depression are climbing. We see that early on in the pandemic, it was maybe lower, 8% of anxiety, then almost tripled to 28%, and then again 36.9%. Depression is hand in hand. They act on the same inflammatory cascades in the brain, and that was 6.6% to 24.4% to 30%. If you look at other studies, they've said it's actually doubled to tripled, where 1 in 3 people had complaints of depression, and that is during the pandemic and currently now. So we cannot ignore that there are high rates of depression and anxiety, and we cannot ignore the fact that this pandemic has really taken a toll on us on all ages. So what happens when people go through COVID? Some of them survive, some of them go back to their baseline and find ways to thrive. A lot of other people are still suffering from long haulers COVID-19 syndrome. And I really appreciate this study. I think it was really, really well done. It talks about how at least 80% of people with long hauler syndrome has one of these symptoms. And there's a lot of these symptoms. If you see other studies, they say about 50 symptoms have been isolated to be linked to COVID, and specifically the long hauler. And in our clinic, we've served patients with COVID, with post-COVID, many diseases, but we know that people who have COVID have increased symptoms, such as 58% of people in this study actually complained of fatigue. That's really, really high. A lot of people are exhausted and they're probably already burned out from their work and this pandemic, and they're ending this disease with even more fatigued. I have patients that are still on post-COVID after a year and have been on disability because they couldn't go back to their work and function again. 44% of people are complaining of headache in this study, and about 20-something%, I would say, 27% specifically have attention disorder. So they're actually having problems with focus. They're not only having pain, but they're unable to complete their work. They're unable to be present, and it's hard for them to make healthy choices when you're having these symptoms. And so 20% of patients, we know this, lose their taste of loss of smell, and then 16% have memory loss. That's really sad, that people are struggling with their memory after COVID, that they have complaining of brain fog. They don't have that same clarity, and they're struggling to remember. And then this is the mental health component that I want to highlight, is that 13% of them are suffering from anxiety, 12% from depression, 11% of sleep disorders. So that means they're lacking either quality sleep or it's just fragmented. And we know overall, this is a generic, I would say, phrase to say 70% are still saying their mental health is off. They don't feel the same. They're not as happy. They're not as satisfied with life, and they're just overwhelmed. And then 6% have some type of psychiatric illness, which means after COVID, I've seen psychosis, meaning people having hallucinations, not hearing things and seeing things that are not actually there. People who are having bipolar-like symptoms where they are unable to have reasonable thoughts, and it just becomes very fearful for a lot of my patients. And then this is the autoimmune component. A lot of patients are complaining of joint pain, specifically 19%. There are other patients who also have muscle aches. About 12% have digestive issues in this study, and that's huge. I have a lot of patients still complaining of reflux, gastritis, which means just discomfort in their stomach, cramping. They have complaints of bloating. Some of them I've seen have pancreatic insufficiency, where their whole microbiome is off. They're unable to digest, and they can only tolerate liquids. And it's really been a sad experience to see these patients suffer. But at the same time, we've worked together to find how can we use lifestyle medicine, how can you use plant-based nutrition to help bring down the inflammation in the body. And then 12% show skin changes. So if that's either because of the immune response or because of the stress that they're enduring, that there's rashes. As you can see, yes, maybe the other more common causes are shortness of breath and other things, and cough, but often a lot of people forget the mental health and autoimmune repercussions from COVID. So why is mental health so important? Really, it's because mental health is just as important as physical wellness. They're equally important. Chronic medical conditions can increase the risk for mental illness. It's a bidirectional illness. That's just like Chef AJ was saying, if you have a healthy mind, you likely will have healthy body. And mental illnesses can increase the risk of many types of physical ailments, such as hypertension. So people with blood pressure issues tend to have anxiety as well. Those who have stroke tend to also have depression. So, and those with cancer also have depression, anxiety. So there's increased risk of all these ailments. So mental health is important. If people have depression, anxiety, there are studies that increases the risk for heart disease, chronic pain, dementia, diabetes, and also autoimmune disease. They come hand in hand. It really is a total body connection when it comes to mental health. So we know that there's a mental health crisis. It's just becoming the leading cause of disability, specifically because of depression. People are feeling hopeless. That's actually the symptoms of depression. They're unable to have a good relationship with food. They don't have the appetite, or they're overeating, or they just can't get out of bed. They're feeling actually really guilty about themselves. They feel that they're a failure. They feel that they are not able to function in life, and it's sad. And we have to do something differently, not only raise awareness, but actually discover better solutions. And it's not only medications. So the second common cause of death is actually in teenagers, specifically suicide. So this really breaks my heart, because we have too many teenagers, too many young adults suffering not only from depression, but they are going into the state where they are killing themselves. And that's the end stage. That's the worst thing we can hear, is when we hear a young teenager ending their life so soon. And the reason why is because teenagers have not only the increased risk of their social atmosphere is not the same, they're still developing, but because they end up getting symptoms of depression, anxiety very early on, and doctors are not recognizing this soon enough. And teenagers and families are having a hard time verbalizing it too. So in the US, we have 50 million adults that have mental health disorders. And really, it's been 12 million people who report serious suicide ideation. So it's always my mission, my goal, to have suicide prevention and not ignore mental health complaints in any way. I address that in all my visits, because when someone has the idea, especially a plan, we have to intervene very quickly. So 57% of individuals actually don't receive medical treatment for mental health. That's really sad. Most of the time, people are stuck at home. They don't know how to get help, and they're just too overwhelmed with their symptoms. Oftentimes, they turn to other things for support. I have a young patient in her 20s who ended up just drowning herself into substance use, meaning alcohol and smoking, and it's just caused her to not think as clearly. But I'm happy to see that she actually does show up to my clinic and wants to have that change. But I would say 50% of people don't get medical treatment. So not only is depression a life-threatening disorder that affects 14.8 million Americans who are 18 and up, but we know it affects younger children, so 18 and younger, and that this STAR trial, so this basically is one of the largest studies in the psychiatry realm. All the data that we can get, important information, and it says nearly 40% had their first episode of depression before age 18. So that's really big, 40%. So we definitely have to keep our eyes on our children, on our teenagers, because by the time they're 20s and 30s, they're either in school or in their jobs. Many of them are actually needing support, either through therapy or medications or some lifestyle intervention. So we have to start early. There are many health disparities in our world, especially that we've studied in the US, and it does not discriminate, meaning everyone has some type of mental health condition. And I would say that it's higher in people who are young and middle age, in women specifically, non-white persons, and then people who are undereducated, previously married, or unemployed. And so we know now, not only through the pandemic, but there are differences in our populations who really need our help and our attention. And so other vulnerable groups are people with other chronic illnesses, as I mentioned, especially those suffering from cancer, going under chemo, people who are hospitalized, especially those when I was in the hospital who just had a stroke or heart attack, or if they are in the ICU for a really long time. And then other mental health disorders really coincide with people who smoke, drink, or have any other substance use. And then looking at the family history is important. A lot of times mental health disorders run in the family, and not many people like to talk about it. It's really hush hush. People are uncomfortable. Sometimes it's one of those topics that's never gets talked about for generations. It's hidden, and we need to ask. I always encourage my patients, ask your family members, has there been someone with depression, anxiety? Has there been a suicide attempt? Because if there has been, we really need to pay attention to that, because likely that genetic, I would say, risk can be passed down, and also the expression of that can be worsened when there is stress in the family or unhealthy habits.
So we're going to switch gears a little bit here and talk about psychoneuroimmunology. It's a big word, but it is very, very important. And your gut, your brain, and your immune system is all connected. There are many, many different scientific articles on the internet that talk about this connection. And in rheumatology, which I study, we don't talk much about this, but there are different articles they talk about in psychiatry and psychology as well. So the food you put in your body here, which is the bottom here, is your gut microbiome. I'm sure on Chef AJ, many different doctors and health professionals have talked about the gut microbiome already. And you know that fiber and phytonutrients from fruits and vegetables are very, very beneficial for that. And the vagus nerve, which is this yellow line here, is one of the longest nerves in the body, and it connects your brain to the gut. And that's one of the ways they communicate. And when you put inflammatory foods in your body, like processed foods, that information does go towards the brain through different cytokines in the immune system. And then that also then talks through the hypothalamus to the hormonal system, here indicated by the left side, the pituitary gland, the ACTH hormone, and then it talks to your adrenal glands, where your cortisol, your stress hormones are produced. And sometimes you don't want to overproduce them for too long, because if you do that, it's counterproductive. So your cortisol does go up during stressful situations like fight or flight situation, but you don't want to keep going on days on end. You want to calm down. And then also the brain sends out immune system cytokines, signals throughout the rest of the body through something called interleukins, interleukin 1, interleukin 6, interleukin 10. They're just pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory signals. So your brain does have the ability to talk to the rest of the system through the immune system. And it sends it out through something called neuropeptides, enteroendocrine cells, and it goes back to the gut. So it goes from the gut to the brain, to the endocrine system, and also back to the gut through the immune system. So it gets very, very complicated. So there is something also called psychoneuroendocrinology, immunology. So it is very, very, it's a big topic, and it's not talked about enough, and it's something that we're going to be hearing more about in the future. And I'm so excited to see what other therapies they have. But for now, I would say food is so important. And I will talk to you about a study on lupus that shows how plant-based diets have helped with lupus that came out this past year. So in psychoneuroimmunology, like I mentioned earlier, they have come up with 3 possible pathways that the immune system can affect the brain. So there's a humoral pathway, there's a neural pathway, and there's a cellular pathway. So the humoral pathway, they send out inflammatory signals from the monocytes and macrophages, which are part of your white blood cell system, and they can target your brain through various pathways. through here, something called nitric oxide and PGE2. There's just some signals that the brain responds to. There's another part called a neural pathway, which your immune system can talk to through the vagus nerve, which I talked about earlier. So the vagus nerve, I didn't mention. So what studies have found was that when you stimulate the vagus nerve, it's actually anti-inflammatory. There are studies going on that stimulate it through different machines, but there are natural ways of stimulating the vagus nerve, and that is through meditation, exercising, humming. Those are just some of the ways, okay? But you can, but there are signals that go through the vagus nerve. And then there's also another way that your immune system talks to the brain, and that's through the cellular pathway, and that's through something called tumor necrosis factor alpha, and that's an inflammatory cytokine. So you do have some inflammatory signals that go through the body, and that's natural because your body's constantly fighting off viruses and bacterial infections, but you don't want to overstimulate it. And when you do overstimulate it, that's when you're more prone to autoimmune disease, which is my specialty. And this is just a graphic from the same article that talks about how inflammation is balanced out by T cells. So there's several types of T cells out there. The main ones you need to know, which I did talk about in my previous talk with Chef AJ, is a T regulatory cells and a T helper 17 cells. Your T regulatory cells are anti-inflammatory, and your T helper 17 cells are pro-inflammatory, and they are active in the brain. So your brain is not separated from your immune system. There are immune cells in the brain. So this is so important to brain health. And this is just another graphic on how your white blood cells talk to the brain through the neuroendocrine function and various parts of the brain. Something called the anterior cingulate cortex, basal ganglia, synaptic plasticity, and neurotransmitter metabolism. So your brain does affect your neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, GABA. These things are influenced by the immune system, which is very surprising because back then we thought everything was separated, but in fact they are connected. And of course, we had to talk about COVID-19. So COVID-19, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because COVID, like many other viruses, like Epstein-Barr virus, cytomegalovirus, and other viruses, can induce autoimmune disease. So these are all different rheumatology diseases that I see in my clinics. So of course, you've probably heard of SLE, which is lupus. Here is reactive arthritis, which is a type of arthritis. Rheumatoid arthritis, very popular. I'm sure you guys have heard of it. What else is there here? Spondyloarthritis here, ankylosing spondylitis, and something called giant cell arteritis, which is more, you get it with headaches. Symptoms are headaches, trouble with chewing, you get tired when you chew. Sometimes you get blurriness or blindness from it, and that is inflammation of your temporal artery, and that usually happens in people over the age of 50. So I recently saw that yesterday in my clinic. So COVID-19 has been able to stimulate these autoimmune diseases. Whether these patients had something underlying already and just COVID just sparked it to become positive, or they had nothing underlying and just COVID just sparked it on its own, we don't know. But what we do know is that there is a connection with the COVID virus with autoimmune disease. And this is why it's so important to talk about the gut-brain immune connection, because it ties right in with COVID as well. So I mentioned earlier that there was an article this year in 2022 with plant-based diets and lupus. So this is in the Journal of Lupus, and they looked at whether plant-based diets helped improve symptoms in patients with lupus. And this was a survey done. And what they did found that it did help patients with lupus. So as you can see on the left side here, this is the I think the before and after and various symptoms here. So this is a percent of improvement on the right, all the way from 0 to 80%. So if you're on a vegan diet, I think the black one here was on, I think arthritis or some other symptom. There you can see there are improvements when you go on a vegan diet. On a vegetarian diet, they also noted improvements as well. When you are on a no dairy diet, no gluten, so gluten can impact autoimmune disease as well, because gluten in autoimmune disease can impact leaky gut. Whether that translates into physical symptoms varies from patient to patient. But from Harvard, Dr. Fasano has done a lot of research on gluten and the leaky gut. And he has found that leaky gut does happen. In America, gluten is more processed. I have heard stories that when my patients go to Europe, they're able to eat the gluten there more than the United States. I think it's the way it's processed in America. But vegan and vegetarian diets do have a big impact. And vegetables also has an impact on improvement, as well as low or no processed food. So all these different things are processed here. So we want to avoid them. And carbohydrates, they're probably talking about processed carbohydrates like chips, cookies, pastries, white flour. So those are the things that they're talking about. And on the right side, they asked, did changing your eating patterns help with any of the following? So when they did change their eating pattern, probably to a more vegetarian diet, their mood improved, their sleep improved, muscle aches and pain improved. So changing the diet just to eat more vegetables in general had a positive improvement in lupus and the cognitive function of lupus. That's where the gut-brain immune function comes in. That's why this title of this article says plant-based diet changes may improve symptoms in patients with lupus. So this ties in with all other autoimmune diseases. So I know this was just done on lupus, but when we talk about integrative medicine, we are talking about how do we impact inflammation from the underlying causes and the foundation. It's different than regular Western medicine, because regular Western medicine, we are looking at trials and studies that target different parts of the immune system and what medications can we use to calm those parts of the inflammation down. But when we talk about integrative medicine and functional medicine, we look at how we can impact inflammation from a general standpoint, and that can impact all parts of inflammation. So that's why plant-based diets are so powerful, because it impacts the gut microbiome in a positive way. And that then in turn impacts inflammation in the brain and also the immune system in a positive way. This was another study on rheumatoid arthritis and risk of developing depression with RA. And this study showed that there is a higher risk. There was more association in patients with depression when they had RA versus patients that did not have rheumatoid arthritis. And it makes sense. When you have rheumatoid arthritis, you have a disease of systemic inflammation already. All autoimmune diseases are diseases of inflammation. So that inflammation, those signals go to the brain, and that will spark more inflammation and in turn cause depression. So remember when I talked about the vagus nerve and all those different pathways, psychoneuroimmunology, eating plants will talk to the brain and the immune system in an anti-inflammatory way. It doesn't get any more simple than that. So whatever Chef AJ is doing is very, very beneficial for inflammation. And all the plant-based doctors out there, we have a very similar message. My focus is just on autoimmune disease and inflammation. But when we're talking about diabetes, heart disease, it's the same mechanism, same message. Heart disease is also, there's an immune system component to it. You just don't get heart attacks without the immune system being involved. Tumor necrosis factor, which I talked about earlier, is an inflammatory signal in the body and the immune system that gets activated when there's heart attacks. It's not just cholesterol. And this was just another part of that study. So RA in general impacts about 1% of adults in the United States. That equates to about over 1 million patients, and over 17% of RA patients have depression. So a lot of my autoimmune disease patients have some type of psychiatric diagnosis, whether it's anxiety or depression. And what the studies showed that when we gave medications for rheumatoid arthritis, it can help with the depression symptoms. So some of my patients, I give the medications to target their rheumatology diseases, and sometimes it does clear up the brain fog or helps with their depression, but sometimes it's not completely effective. They need that nutritional component to augment whatever their pharmaceutical drug is doing for them. And we do need more studies to show what else we can do with depression, anxiety to help with RA patients instead of pharmaceutical medications. But I already know the answer for this. I don't need studies to tell me exactly what else to do. It's with food, it's with supplements, it's with mind-body medicine. It's about exercising and meditation. And we're going to talk about that later in this talk. And this is just a diagram of how inflammation can impact RA and mental health. So inflammation sends out signals to the brain through the immune system, and that then in turn with the inflammation in the brain causes psychological stress, and then you're causing more stress hormones to come out, and then in long-term stress hormones, like I mentioned earlier, is detrimental. It's not good for you. And then the inflammation then causes fatigue, mental health issues. That's why when Dr. Melissa talked about COVID and long haulers, we are seeing an uptick in fatigue and mental health issues, because COVID long haulers is, I think, an autoimmune disease. We're going to eventually coin it an autoimmune disease because the symptoms are there. It only makes sense. We don't have a great medication right now to target long haulers. I think it takes integrated medicine. It takes plant-based nutrition and that calming down the inflammation to fight long haulers and COVID-19. And this is one of my last slides before we go back to Dr. Melissa, but this is something called adverse childhood events. And this is something I talk about all the time in my clinic. Every time I see a new patient, I always ask my patients, have you ever been abused? Did you have a lot of stress growing up? So when you are growing up, any type of abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, that adds stress to the body. And these children, they will then have inflammation in the brain through the immune system. Your immune system is very fluid when you're a child. Even as an adult, this can happen. And then that in turn will talk to the immune system and generate inflammatory signals, talk to the endocrine system, the hormonal system, and then you will produce more cortisol as a child, and you'll have chronic cortisol activation. Remember when I said cortisol is a stress hormone? You want that to be activated to calm down inflammation short term. You want that to be activated when you're in the fight or flight situation. But you don't want that to be activated for a long term, because your adrenals get stressed out. Your cortisol, it's activated too long. Your body, it doesn't respond well to that. And then in turn, you generate more inflammation. And then with adverse childhood events, you get more gut dysbiosis. Your gut, it becomes leaky. Your gut microbiome changes. It's not as healthy anymore. And besides adverse childhood events, the way your mother was raised and the way her life was, and what did she do when she was carrying you in her womb? Was she stressed out? Did she smoke? All these things get passed down. And you as a child, when you grow up, you are in turn more prone to obesity, substance abuse, poor sleep, and more mental health issues. And there are many studies coming out in the past 10 to 20 years that shows that adverse childhood events are linked to increased risk of autoimmune disease, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis. And it only makes sense because your immune system is activated. There's more inflammation in the body already. So if you have the genetic component in place already to get autoimmune diseases with adverse childhood events, that's going to add a higher risk already. Remember, genetics loads the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. So this is a lifestyle component. Unfortunately, when we're a child, we can't really control our environment. We can't control if we're in a foster home. We can't control whether we get abused or not. I mean, it's very hard. So growing up in a healthy environment impacts our health in the long run. And social psychoneuroimmunology is something that's going to be researched on much more in the future. It's about how your social experiences impacts the immune system and how the brain monitors the immune system. It's a feedback loop here. And I am so excited about what other research is going to come out, because mental health psychologists, psychiatrists, and dietitians are so important with autoimmune disease and healing the body, not just endocrinologists or rheumatologists or any other doctor that is involved with specific autoimmune disease, but it's the whole team involved. That's why I spend a whole hour with my patients on the new visit, because I talk about all these things. When they have a mental component or abuse growing up, I tell them you need to heal from that. You need to see a therapist to talk it out, because that's part of the healing process. Medications alone sometimes aren't good enough to fight autoimmune disease. And I'm going to hand this over now back to Dr. Melissa.
Yeah, so that's a great transition, because when we think about social health, our environment, our psychological health, and even emotional health, a lot of people don't even know what their emotions are. They don't know how to verbalize it. They just think they're sad. They just think they're angry or short-tempered. But really, there's so many components to their emotions. It becomes almost this negative self-talk that is, I'm not good enough. I'm ugly, or I'm a horrible person, I'm bad. And it's this ugly cycle, sadly, that we see in our patients. And I would not doubt if it hasn't happened to the most of us, right? There are some times when we have trauma, we have stress, when there's a transition, a loss in a loved one, a change in job, where we have these emotions. When it becomes one thing, meaning there's emotional health and you're able to have this resilience, but if you don't have the healthy coping mechanisms, it tends to be disordered. It tends to be symptoms that don't allow people to function, and that actually manifests into diseases. And so I always focus on emotional health as well, what they're thinking, how they're feeling, and how are they connecting with others. Those three basic things, because when one is out of order, it's likely that they are suffering, and they're more likely to have unhealthy responses to stress. So we have to pay attention not only with mental health at every stage of life, starting, like I said, from childhood to adolescence, but like Dr. Yu said, as a young mother, as they are bearing their children for the next generation. And so when we look at what are the causes of mental health, it's very complex. Dr. Yu talked about the autoimmune component, but I would say in all the research, in all the studies, they have not found the single cause of depression. When you think of heart disease or you think of diabetes, it's a little bit more simpler. For diabetes, they say, well, it's sugar. And yes, they'll say inflammation. For cholesterol, they'll say it's likely because of the saturated fat from the diet. For heart disease, they'll say it's because of a plaque. However, with mental health conditions, there's so many factors, so many highways involved, that it's not that simple, and they have not been able to pinpoint it, but they know it's multifactorial. So it's the imbalance of neurotransmitters, which I'll explain. These are the signals, these are the that go to the brain, but also go to the gut and the immune system. And so we need to make sure there's a balance in that. It's actually thyroid too. I have patients with hypothyroidism who feel extremely depressed, and not many people have found that connection. They feel fatigued, they have this sense of headache, and it's not just because they're gaining weight and they're feeling cold, it's because their thyroid has not been monitored, and they have not found ways to support their thyroid either through nutrition or medication. And so thyroid is something we cannot ignore. And also with hyperthyroidism, many people have the sense of anxiety, sense of their heart rate is very high, they're sweating. And a lot of, I would say, patients, but even healthcare providers, they are unable to see that connection. And it takes them a while to find the actual diagnosis. So when I think about depression, anxiety, I always look at the thyroid. And there are actual treatments to say not only it's an antidepressant, but they actually use thyroid medication to balance that out. But once again, I always look at the lifestyle and the nutrition. And just as Dr. Yu has mentioned, there is neuroinflammation. When the brain is inflamed, the brain feels heavy. It feels like it cannot focus. It cannot actually perform tasks or concentrate and feel as if they are happy. Sadly, and a lot of we share patients all the time, and they have symptoms of ADHD, sometimes post-traumatic stress disorder, OCD, and it's very hard when the brain is stressed to function. And so we also look at trauma, as Dr. Yu said, as they're a child, but also these are micro traumas. I always want to pay attention to micro traumas, microaggressions. They might not be big, impactful things you can remember. They might be subtle things that mom or dad has said to you, or maybe a school friend or a relative that have just gotten to you over the years, and you have no idea why you're so negative, or why when you are trying to do something positive for your health, like lose weight or show up to the gym, that you feel really bad about yourself. You feel intimidated. You feel like you can't go to work. And it's usually because of the impact of small negative traumatic situations that the brain has internalized and remembered, and actually caused inflammation and disordered thinking and disordered neurotransmitters. So not only is the environment important, but also the patients who've had any brain injury. So that's concussions, mild or moderate, where they lost consciousness, or they were in a car accident and they hit their head, or they may have been in a sport and caused some type of brain injury. So when we look at this, we want to always look at the complete picture, because those with any brain injury have high likelihood of any depression, anxiety, or even change of personality. That's what we see in many older studies as well. And then once again, lifestyle factors. So nutrition, exercise, sleep, emotional well-being, stress, toxins, substance use really either increase or decrease the risk of mental health conditions. And then more and more, we are finding that toxins, pesticides, plastics, pollution has an effect on mental health, not just things such as ADHD, but even autism. And I see patients who struggle with autism because they actually haven't been diagnosed since they were until their adult years. And so the learning aspect is another thing I ask. Are you learning okay in school? Is a school hard for you? It's not just because the child is lazy or incompetent. Usually it's some type of lifestyle, environmental factor. And we need to have this holistic approach. We can't just go straight to the medication, go straight to the diagnosis without looking at the whole picture. So what are neurotransmitters? These are kind of fun. I love studying this. I studied this in my college years. I was a psychology major. I studied the doctor-patient relationship. I studied humor in the doctor-patient relationship. And we know that signals such as dopamine and epinephrine are essential for mood, happiness, motivation, arousal, movement, attention, learning, and stress response. We need healthy hormones in our brain and also in our gut, because that is the drive. If we have any type of disease, if we have autoimmune disease, if we have diabetes or gout, if we don't feel happy and motivated, we are likely not to likely to show up our medical appointments, are not likely to take our medication, or maybe not even have the mind and the capability to have the attention to take the medications on time. So I always say, even I know my husband and I were kind of biased. We love our fields very well, but I always say mental health first, and then let's think about everything else. So what are the different types of neurotransmitters and how do they influence health? So serotonin is pretty easy. A lot of people know it. It's the happy hormone, and it is definitely responsible for our mood and our feelings of well-being. But people often forget it's important for our sleeping, digesting, and eating. If we are happy, likely we'll have a good appetite and we will have a good relationship with our food and consume foods that are healthy. If we are unhappy because of lack of serotonin, serotonin. We really go into this place where we might have symptoms of anorexia and bulimia, or we're just not being able to digest because our gut is so stressed out that we have reflux issues, we have bloating, constipation issues, and then it really interferes with our sleep. Beta endorphin is basically the happy hormone once again, but also it regulates stress, it relieves pain, it helps with making clear decisions for food intake, exercise, and having that reward. Food can be pleasurable, just like we look at pleasurable food, what they look like, what they taste like. We want that. And we know the brain also, we need a sense of libido. That's healthy. If we have low libido, that's not a good sign. Is it because of our brain health, or our hormones are off? And then melatonin is, great. Natural forms of melatonin is actually pistachios and tart cherry juice. Some people supplement with it, but it really responds to the darkness at night, and it prepares the brain for bedtime. So we really want to regulate our sleep-wake cycle, because if our brain is healthy and sleeping well, then we're likely to overcome small stresses in our day. But if we're not sleeping enough, we're going to be very vulnerable to the stress in our day, which can cause inflammation and disease. Acetylcholine impacts attention, motivation, movement, memory, and arousal. So this is the neurotransmitter involved in dementia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. And so when this is imbalanced, a lot of people, older people, sadly, are getting it early on, and they're getting tremors. Their walk is different, where they're walking slower, and they aren't able to recall previous memories. And then norepinephrine is, again, that's kind of the adrenaline that we all like. We get pumped up. We want that good feeling. It helps us stay awake. It helps us learn. It helps us memorize and stay aroused and mindful and with a good mood. And then cortisol. Dr. You already talked about that a lot. But we need some healthy stress, but we don't want too much of it. Monoamine oxidase. So I just like to quickly talk about this because a lot of medications focus on this mechanism, and there are foods that can help this or not. And so oxidase, so MOAA, it oxidizes neurotransmitters responsible for psychological and neurological function. So that's a good thing. And then monooxidase B, which is the sister component, involves enzymes that break down chemicals in the brain for mental health. So we need all of this. There are studies, actually, when you have too much of this, you can have this imbalance. We call it monooxidase inhibitors. If you have too much of this, you can be too depressed, too anxious, and people who consume too much cheese, and we call it tyrosine and tryptophan in the turkey world, that they can have more symptoms of depression and anxiety. And even red wine actually affects this whole mechanism. So whatever we're consuming is actually very important. And we think about neurotrophic factors for a reason, because our brain is very resilient. When you think about the brain, it's humongous, right? It's very important. It's a vital organ. It's one of the heaviest organ in our brain. And it's to the point where we say its neuroplasticity is important, because it generates and degrades neurons rapidly, because we're constantly learning, constantly trying to store information, and we don't necessarily use all of our brain, which we have the potential to, but the brain is so complex that we need to feed it healthy foods. We look at the brain derived neurotrophic factor and the GABA, because there are certain foods that can stimulate this. And we want a healthy brain to take away the toxins and the inflammation, and also keep the healthy nutrition, keep the healthy anti-inflammatory signals in our brain. So inflammatory responses in the brain are important. Once again, if it's any foreign bodies, if it's stress, if it's a unpredictable situation, bacteria, viruses, toxins, it can increase this fight or flight response. It can impact the metabolic and molecular pathways, and also these neurotransmitters. As you can see, look at this microglia and macrophage. This is Dr. Yu's favorite thing to talk about. And I also appreciate this very much, because you have, once again, when there's less tyrosine and tryptophan, it actually creates more stress on the body. And that means also less serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. So when you're inflamed already because of poor diet or poor lifestyle, or you have some type of chronic disease, you're likely to become more having more anxiety and more depression. And then these glutamate metabolisms here too, this is your astrocytes. These are responsible not only for memory, but also for nerves. You can see that the microglia is responsible for cleaning up the inflammation in the body. So we have a good filter in the brain, but when you overload the brain with unhealthy foods and stress, it can only do so much. And so we really have to look at the dynamic. When you see the first symptoms actually of mental health disorders are anhedonia. You can see this from the cascade here. They're less likely to have motivation. They're not really connecting to their activities. They're not wanting to do things that they would usually do. They find less pleasure, and that becomes very anxiety provoking. And then that leads to depression. So it's this cycle that goes on over and over again. And so we really want to avoid these things that trigger depression and anxiety. And that's why we're going to talk about the gut. So we know, yes, that antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, and mood stabilizers work on the brain and gut. There's been studies to do that. We know that 90% of serotonin lies in the gut and 50% of dopamine are produced in the gut. So that microbiome with all the DNA and the nerves produce those hormones that are responsible for mood, energy, motivation, sense of reward. So I always say it's not just about the medication. What are we feeding the gut? So what are we doing in our lifestyle that impacts the gut? Many things. And here again is a lovely study. As you can tell, we love these studies because it's not only showing that there's a nervous system, there's an inflammation system, but also they're all talking together, especially at the I would say the microbiome level, but this blood-brain barrier. So people used to think, well, it's what stays in the gut gets digested and you poop it out. It's not that simple. The gut actually absorbs all that negative processed food, animal products, and it feeds it everywhere and into the brain. So here are food choices that impact inflammatory pathways. We know that the standardized diet, which is chicken, pork, heavy meats, eggs, cow's milk, white bread, white pasta. It's very inflammatory. It's this sense of where it has high sugar, high salt, and increases inflammation, specifically through choline and L-carnitine, increasing TMA. It acts in the liver, but also acts in the gut. When it goes to the liver, so our liver is so important because it breaks down glucose, it breaks down fat. That's why a lot of people struggle with both diabetes, but fatty liver. And then all that inflammation goes to the heart. It goes to all the vessels. And there's also vessels in our brain. That's why people have increase of Alzheimer's and dementia, because there's so much clogging of the brain itself through not just plaques, but also through inflammation. And so this increases the risk of heart failure, heart disease, because of this interaction. And then at the gut level, you see this once again, this is what Dr. Yu is calling the leaky gut, but we also call it increased permeability. When you have poor healthy foods, you have decreased short chain fatty acids, and then works at the inflammation level. And that impacts on this side, which is the right, the risk of depression. So people who are also more obese have more rates of depression. And so we really got to pay attention to that extra weight. Unfortunately, that's where inflammation hides. And so when we have a healthy diet, plants, fruits, vegetables, beans, nuts, and seeds, it increases our phytochemicals, increases the vitamins and minerals that act on every single cell of the body, that allows all the processing and all the cleaning up in the brain and in the whole body. It increases omega-3 fatty acids, poly and monounsaturated fat, and fiber, our favorite. So when you are able to do this, you can have better neurogenesis, so the brain can recover, regenerate healthy nerves, and also help with that neuroplasticity, bring down inflammation, help regulate the stress hormones, and also help with the tryptophan balance and the gut microbiome. And that mitochondrial dysfunction too. Often we forget that every cell has powerhouses of energy that clean all the stress in our body. And so we need to make sure we have a healthy diet to feed that and to overcome oxidative stress. Unfortunately, with the Western diet, it's high calorie, low in nutrients, low in vitamins, low in minerals, and high in trans fat and high in saturated fat. And that's why many people are suffering from depression. So I say a healthy lifestyle is the first step in preventing and treating mood disorders, mental health disorders, and autoimmune disorders, and also gut disorders. So let's just talk about this trans fat. So it's, yes, people are very obsessed about, oh, where can I get my fat? I need a fat or I don't need fat. People are confused. But the one thing I want to make clear is trans fat is unhealthy. It consists of unhealthy fatty acid made from hydrogen oils. And this is basically, if you look at this diagram, found in margarine, so donuts, cupcakes that are full of oil, specifically vegetable oil, that raises LDL, which is the bad cholesterol, and lowers HDL, which is the good cholesterol. And that increases your risk for heart disease, stroke, and diabetes. And so we want to be careful of what we're consuming. When it comes to saturated fat, which is on the left side here, that's found in bacon, cheese, milk, butter, and even coconut oil, which people forget is that this raises LDL and HDL, but total cholesterol goes really, really high, and that increases risk of heart disease. When we look at this specifically, there's a contrast consumption between monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fat. There's a detrimental relationship that was found with trans fat and depression risk. So the more trans fat you have, the higher risk of depression. This was done in a study in 2011. And so people just think it's heart that it impacts or stroke, but it impacts depression as well. When you look at cardiovascular disease and depression, they share common mutual determinants that are related to the subtypes of fat intake. So we know that trans fat is unhealthy, saturated fat is unhealthy, but we can actually consume certain parts of this unsaturated fat. This is where the gold is. This is what helps. So monounsaturated fat, specifically oleic acid and omega-3 or omega-9 is found in olive oil and avocado. This helps lower LDL and raises the good cholesterol, which is the HDL, and lowers the risk for heart disease and also many things like autoimmune disease and depression, anxiety. And it's a good source of vitamin E. So the polyunsaturated here, this is your omega-3 and omega-6. Yes, you can find this omega-3 found in fish, but we also like chia seeds and flax seeds and walnuts because those are very high in omega-3 and fiber. There's some omega-6 found in nuts and seeds, but we want to be careful. We don't want to overconsume omega-3 or omega-6 because it has vegetable oil, corn, soybean, sunflower oil. Those are pro-inflammatory. So we want to have a good balance of this pro and anti-inflammatory, I would say, between omega-3 and omega-6. This may sound familiar to you, but I would say the standard American diet is incredibly inflammatory. That's what Dr. Yu and I grew up on. We ate all of that, and we actually became very sick in our own health conditions with the sodas and the cookies and the crackers and the fried food, and it really killed not only our immune system, but our gut health and our brain health. It's very pro-inflammatory. And so looking at this layer by layer, I love how it just shows that at the gut level, at the liver level, and also at the artery level, which is affects our heart health, that you can see that it all talks back and forth. And that's why if we have unhealthy standardized American diets such as this junk food and processed food, we end up getting more sick, and we need to find ways to overcome that. Why? Because the standard American diet has arachidonic acid, which is pro-inflammatory, and it's found in all animal products. It adversely impacts mental health through neuroinflammation, which we talked about. That arachidonic acid really is what stimulates the inflammation, and when we can actually restrict these foods, when we can minimize animal products, we can reduce mood variability. So we know that higher rates of orotic acid increases the risk of not only suicide, but depression. There's studies that found on that. And we know that orotic acid has high amounts of it is found in eggs, chicken, beef, pork, and fish. So omnivores, so that's basically our animal eaters, consume 9 times more orotic acid compared to plant-based eaters. That's a lot of information in one sitting, in one lifestyle. So I hope that you can challenge yourself to lower your orotic acid levels by taking a break from eggs, chicken, beef, and pork, and consuming more plant-based foods, whole foods. If it's tofu or soybean, edamame, jackfruit beans, kale, spinach, lentils, there's so many options. But I encourage you to put a break on the animal-based foods and increase your plant-based foods. So as I talked about before, unsaturated fat, I would say overall, you want to look, where is your source from? People like to get it just from supplements, but it's not just the supplements. You know, fish have it, but where do the fish get it? They get it from the algae, and it's the most pure form. But what I love too is some people can't handle the fishy ocean taste, but you can get it from your flaxseed. So flaxseed oil is just as good. And so the research has showed that when you have more of these plant-based foods, more of the unsaturated healthy foods that are full of monounsaturated fat, it lowers blood pressure, improves cholesterol levels, and reduces cardiovascular risk, and also decreases inflammation. So omega-3 and omega-6 are essential for polyunsaturated fats. We know that impacts mental health. We want the ratio, some studies say 1-to-1 would be ideal. If you can do 4-to-1, you're on a great start. And to measure that out, it's kind of difficult. I would say you have to calculate all your omega-3s, all your omega-6s, put it on a chart. If you have a registered dietitian, maybe that they can help, but there are some specialized tests that can do that as well. My goal is always saying, if you can consume more of the whole omega-3s, then that's better than having the oils. Because if you have too much of the healthy oils, even if it's avocado or flaxseed, you may not realize how much you're putting. And at least with the whole form, you can control how much you're using. So it's recommended that individuals consume less than 5 to 10% of daily calories from omega-6 fats, because too much consumption can increase inflammation for depression. That's really, really important. So we don't want to increase too much of that inflammation. So too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. So that's why there's a limit. This is definitely appreciated by American Heart Association, where we want to keep these healthy fats less than 5 if possible. Has anyone heard of the ORAC value? I love this. When I was first studying plant-based nutrition, I was looking at this. This is basically to show how much antioxidants are in the food that we eat. What's the potency? What's the strength? So that stands for oxygen radical absorption capacity. And so that's basically an analysis that measures the total antioxidant power of foods. And when we have anti-inflammatory diets, such as fresh fruits and vegetables, this can lower inflammation in the body. And look at this. These are my favorite. You can see the high ones are acai berry, barley are high, kale, prunes, blueberries are really high. And then pomegranates, because not all fruit and vegetables are created equally. People used to say, oh, I eat a banana and an apple. That's enough. And it's actually, if you want the highest antioxidants, let's go for the berries. Let's really go for the spinach and the alfalfa and the broccoli. And when it comes to vegetables too, you can see that some of the higher vegetables are actually going to be your onions, your alfalfa, and then unlike some of your tomatoes are great for vitamin C, but it doesn't always have the highest amount. So here's the GEICO study. This is important because it's one of the largest studies that follows plant-based eating in a group. And they show that over time, when they had plant-based eating, they had lower risk of depression, they had better emotional well-being, and they were able to connect with others. And they were able to have better, I would say, emotional states where they're not as sad, not as angry, not as I would say to the point where they're feeling anxious. So plant-based nutrition works, and this is why, because it has flavonoids, polyphenols. It's found in fruits, vegetables, tea, coffee, cocoa. It actually helps with cognition, increases the blood flow in our brain, helps protect against brain stress. So that's neuronal stress through anti-inflammatory cascades and antioxidative effects. And it also stimulates the good hormone, which is the BDNF. So really, once again, our fruits and vegetables are the healthy cleaners in our body. We need cleaners because we have so much toxins and stress in the body. And once again, I love fiber because there's a big overlap of irritable bowel syndrome and depressed mood and anxiety. A lot of patients who have IBS or any type of bloating, disordered constipation and reflux and diarrhea is because their neurons in their whole gut has been altered because they don't know how to relax. Unfortunately, Dr. Yu talked about the vagus nerve. And so meditation is so important. Slowing down, doing less is a good thing, and really allowing our brain to process, but also letting our food digest slowly. So rest and digest. When there's an alteration or damage in the gut microbiome, serotonin is altered and then the mood is changed. And so that means the gut motility is impaired. So that's why people they struggle getting little small bowel movements or very large bowel movements. So we need fiber, if it's soluble and insoluble, to help with the gut bacteria growth and also the productivity of the microbiome. So here's another large study. 12,000 people consumed plant-based foods over 2 years. And amazingly, they reported increased levels of happiness, emotional well-being. And that's why people like us, like Chef AJ in the plant-based world, we can keep going. We have a lot of energy. We feed each other positive, happy signals because we eat whole foods. And we like to say up to 8 servings of fruits and vegetables per day because this study says that increased life satisfaction. They really had a joy in their life. Here's another study that studied happiness specifically, 21 studies that looked at healthy diet patterns and the reduced odds of depression. And so those who consumed healthier diets had lower odds of depression, and they just decreased the risk by 16%. That is amazing because most antidepressants and I would say, anxiety medications act similarly, maybe just 5 to 10%, for in some, maybe 20%. So it's actually equivalent to a depression and anxiety medication. And I would say not everyone can go off medications very quickly. They definitely need medical guidance. So please try not to take it off without medical guidance, and do this slowly and with supervision, because it is a very slow and steady process when you're trying to overcome mental health conditions, because usually it's a lifetime of disordered neurochemicals. So in this study, particularly, we saw that high fruit and vegetables, whole grains, they used the Mediterranean diet and Japanese diet, which had fish, but they showed that it decreases the risk of depression. So let's talk about zinc. Zinc can be found in your beans, your seeds like hemp seeds, tofu, edamame, and lentils. And we have seen those who have low zinc levels are likely to have treatment-resistant depression. What does that mean? People who've tried all sorts of antidepressants still struggle with depression because they have an imbalance of their diet. They're not consuming zinc-rich foods, which is found in plant-based nutrition. So it helps when we replete the zinc levels, and that can help them show that they can overcome their depression. Specifically, they use zinc supplementation, and that helped reduce the depression symptoms in this study. But I always say, let's go for the whole foods. Here's another one, magnesium. So depression before was very low, very rare, maybe not talked about as much. And before they were studying magnesium deficiencies in depression and other mood disorders, and they show that magnesium improves sleep by decreasing the frequency of headaches and lessened anxiety and depression. So amazingly, magnesium helps at the brain level as well. I always talk about magnesium with my patients because it really helps them have better sleep, relieve their headache, and then once again, overcome their mental health issues. So vegan intakes of magnesium are actually significantly higher than non-vegetarians and actually more adequate. So if you're worried about if you're consuming enough magnesium, just look at your plate. If you're having a lot of plant-based foods, you're doing a good thing. And here is curcumin, turmeric. We love this. Dr. Yu and I always talk about this because there are not only thousands of studies nationally and internationally, and they focus on inflammation, but also depression. So this one is a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled study, which is the most significant study in research showing that a highly absorbed form of curcumin, so 500 milligrams twice a day, can be effective for treating major depression disorder after 8 weeks. So we are going to be finishing up really fast. So I really appreciate, thank you, Chef AJ, for the time tracker. And so curcumin can be effective as an antidepressant such as Prozac. So I believe we're pretty much almost done. And basically, the main thing is not only nutrition, but being optimistic. And this is why we talk about biopsychosocial, spiritual aspects, holistic health to improve our mental health and autoimmune and gut conditions. So healthy lifestyles make a difference. Subtle habits make lifelong changes. This is Dr. Yu and I, we are in Dr. Lifestyle Clinic. I have a course, so just reach out to us. I'm talking about plant-based eating, mental health, and total health reset. So check us out. And here's our information.
Yeah, and you can find us on social media, and we have our clinic. So thank you so much.
This was such a wonderful talk. Have you guys ever thought of putting this information in a book?
Yeah,
Yes.
eventually we'll be writing a book.
Absolutely. That's our next project. So we're definitely putting that on the timeline.
Yeah, it's incredible, the breadth and depth of it. There's a couple of questions. Let's see if I can get to a couple of them. Let's see. Here's one from Charmaine. How do you feel about deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's disease?
Great question. So deep brain stimulation has been studied for many, many years. I would say I don't know it too well. I know it's been used in seizures, depression, anxiety, some in dementia. There are other ways that are more subtle. Definitely you want to use deep brain or ECT in a supervised control setting. But yes, it is helpful.
Thank you. And Kathy wants to know, what is DHA and why is it recommended for brain health?
Yeah, so basically that's a form of omega 3 and 6. It's basically something that you see on your supplements and it breaks it down. And it's important because, as we have mentioned, it helps decrease inflammation in the brain, gut, and autoimmune level.
Fantastic. Oh, I want to thank Julie for her super chat donation. I have got to put my glasses on to see, because sometimes they ask questions at the very beginning and then the chat goes on and on. But guys, know you can book a consult and you can follow them on social media. All the links are below in the show notes. Let's see. But here's a comment. The brain cleans up when you sleep. Maybe that's where it's contributing to immune health.
Yeah, it's important to get really good sleep because your brain, yes, it does clean up and it does help with the immune system.
Right. Here's an interesting question for my non-whole food plant-based friends. Which is healthier, butter or margarine? Butter or margarine? Dr. Goldhammer would say, would you rather be shot or hung?
Yeah, we don't recommend either one.
Yeah, it's just, you don't want to mess around with that. It's not worth it.
Absolutely. If you are whole food plant-based, do you get omega-6 fats from the foods as well?
Yeah, you need omega-6 too. So omega-6 are found in the nuts as well. So there's not as much as like processed food, but is some, but that's okay.
Nuts and seeds.
Okay. If you have RA, Liz says, and have eliminated all symptoms and gone off all meds since going whole food plant-based, my Vectra is still in the moderate range. Any thoughts?
Yeah, so the vector score is for rheumatoid arthritis. It talks about how active the disease is. So the vector score tells you what the percent chance of you getting X-ray damages in the next year. So it's important to monitor your aura even though you're off meds and you're whole food plant-based, because there are some studies that show that there can be X-ray changes even when patients are on medications and in remission. So definitely keep seeing your rheumatologist even though you are managing it through food.
Or see Dr. Yu.
Or see me. Yeah, I'm licensed in 15 states.
That's amazing. Chrissy says, any thoughts on autonomic dysfunction? I've been eating healthy for 7 years, but not feeling well.
Yeah, autonomic dysfunction, there's so many different types out there. POTS, postural orthostatic
Tachycardic
syndrome is one of them. I mean, food is a major component, but also there's a field of integrative and functional medicine that can help with that. So those fields, you should definitely see the qualifications of the providers and the educational background, because there's supplements are involved. There's devices that you can use to help with autonomic dysfunction.
Great. Jill says, I teach breathing classes in which we stimulate the vagus nerves. What happens is amazing, and most people can do it.
Exactly. We love deep breathing.
Deep breathing, meditation, hypnosis.
Right. Immune cells in the brain? Like how? Like what? Explain more, please. I've never heard of this.
Oh, that's gonna be a long talk.
You'll come back.
We'll have you come back for that.
When we have our book.
We'll have you come back for this. I wonder if, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, Fuchs disease, sloughing off of the cells of the cornea, is connected to inflammation. I had Dr. Monica Agrawal on this week with Body on Fire, and it seems like every disease is somehow connected to inflammation.
Exactly. Immune cells are somehow connected to all these different diseases, even heart disease.
Absolutely. Well, great. And I know you have some courses, Dr. Mondala. I saw that I linked to those, and you.
Thank you.
They look amazing.
Thank you.
You have a YouTube channel with some recipes. Right. You've got, I found you on Instagram. I didn't see you, meaning you. I mean,
this you.
Oh,
I love that.
I saw that you did tag me on Instagram, my autoimmune MD.
Oh, okay. So I did. Okay. I'll have to find, this is very confusing when your name is you and I'm
I know.
That's why I'm not a you either. Like, how are you?
That is so funny. I love it. Well, thank you. You guys are really delightful, and I can't wait for you guys to have a book. And then when you do, you're going to come on again, and we're going to promote it for you, because I know it's going to be spectacular.
Yeah, and we're going to give you our clinic website just in case we didn't include it in our.
Yeah, it's definitely in the show notes, and I put it in the chat as well.
Perfect.
Sandy says, thank you, Dr. Yu and Dr. Mondala. Such great information. Food is our medicine, and medicine is our food. You both are such a wonderful pair to be listening to. You're sort of like the Shirzais of a different, but I mean, meaning like they're neurologists. It's so great, like a power couple,
Yeah, there's not too many plant-based doctor couples out there.
I know, it's great. I love it. I love what you're doing. Thank you so much. And please feel free to come back anytime.
Yeah, thank you for your show and all you're doing for us.
Oh my God, my pleasure. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. We're also starting 1 hour earlier tomorrow for Dr. Hans Deal. He's going to be talking about forgiveness. Does that ever come up in your practice? Because he really believes that that's
definitely.
Yeah,
it's everything. Unresolved forgiveness is just something that is liberating. It creates freedom in our brains. So I'm excited to hear his talk as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.